In this video, we'll walk you through the basics of configuring workflow for test runs in a project. In Project Administration, go to Navigation, expand Testing, and select Test Run Workflow. The table shows all the test run types configured in your project, and you can configure type-specific workflows for any or all of them. The All Types workflow is the default inherited by the others, so it's a good idea to look at it first and make it as widely applicable as possible. That can then save you time with the type-specific workflows later on. If you've configured workflow for work items or documents, the Workflow Designer will be familiar, and it works just the same for test runs. Start with the Statuses section. Here's where you define every possible status that a test run can have during its life cycle according to your specific process. This simple example has just 3 statuses: open, passed, and failed. Since this is the default for the type-specific workflows, these seem suitably generic. Next, look at the Actions section. The workflow actions you configure here are what users see in the UI when they want to transition a test run from one status to another, so you want to give them action-like names. Again, we have just 3, corresponding to our statuses. For example, to transition a test run to the failed status, users can invoke this action named Mark Failed. The other actions have similar names. It's in Actions that you can exert a lot of control over what happens when a test run status changes. You can require that users invoking the status change have a specific role. Maybe you have a role like Project Test Manager, and you might specify that. You can require that some fields be filled before allowing the transition. There's a Platform custom field, and you might require a value in that one, for example. You can specify some fields to clear on the transition. For example, when a test run moves to the open status, it makes sense to clear Finished On. You can flag any action as the initial one, meaning it will execute when a new test run is created and the initial status is applied. Do you work in a regulated industry where your company has to prove compliance? If so, you can require that users provide an electronic signature when invoking some workflow actions. In this simple example, this might be required for Mark as Passed and Mark as Failed. When a workflow action executes, it can invoke one or more programmatic functions. For example, a date stamp or something from some custom script. You can set one or more conditions that must be satisfied before the workflow action will execute, and the status will be transitioned. For example, fields can be checked for values, or some conditional logic from a custom script can be applied. Now, this is pretty advanced stuff, and it's a little outside the scope of what we're trying to do here. With your statuses and actions configured, you now need to define transitions. Here, you look at each status in the gray column on the left and decide to which other statuses on the same row you will allow a transition and which action users invoke to change to each allowed status. Starting with Open, well, no status can transition to the same status, so we can just leave this one empty, meaning no transition is possible. We can allow Open to transition to the Passed status via the defined Mark Passed action. Transition from Open to Failed also makes sense, and the Mark Failed action would be invoked by users to do that. Now, looking here at the Failed status, let's say that direct transition to Passed is configured in our project's template, or maybe the global configuration, but our process for this project doesn't allow that. So we just remove it here. Then users won't be able to see it, they can't invoke it, so they can never get your process wrong. So that takes care of the default test run workflow configuration for this project. So let's quickly wrap up by tweaking one of the type-specific workflows. In the test run workflow page, we select the test run type we want to customize. When it opens, you can see the configuration is exactly the same as the one we just looked at. So what might we want to tweak? Well, this is a type for an automated test, so the mark passed action probably doesn't need any roll condition, so we can remove that. Then let's say this type has one more status, passed with warning. To add that, we click this button and add a new status definition. And let's see if there's a good icon for it. Oh, this one looks okay. We'll skip description for now, save a few seconds. Notice how the transitions section is updated as we change things. Now we need a corresponding workflow action. We give it an ID and a human-friendly name. And now we just need to review the transitions. We will, of course, allow transition from open to passed with warning. That might even be done by some automated process via the API. If the test passed with warnings, that fact should probably be preserved, so let's not allow direct transition to passed status. But maybe a test manager reviewing the warnings will decide the test run in fact should not pass, so we will allow direct transition to failed via the mark failed action. Now the default workflow required an e-signature for that, and that still makes sense, so we'll keep it. How about the new action? To sign or not to sign? That is the question, and the answer is up to you, because Polarion allows you to set up workflows in whatever way supports the way your teams work. So now you've got the essentials, and hopefully you can get started setting up your test run workflows in your own projects.